the ghost of the gladiators in the echoing ruins of the Roman Colosseum. Where the roar of the crowd once mingled with the clash of steel and the cries of the dying, legends speak of more than just history. They whisper of a lingering presence, a chilling echo of countless brutal deaths, the ghost of the gladiators. This isn't merely a single specter. It's a pervasive haunting, a curse born from the unending torment of lives spent and ended for savage entertainment. Our story begins in modern-day Rome with Dr. Elias Thorne, a renowned historian specialized in Roman amphitheaters. Elias was a pragmatic scholar, believing that all historical phenomena could be explained through logic and evidence. He scoffed at tales of hauntings, seeing them as romantic embellishments of a brutal past. His current project was an ambitious, after-hours acoustic study of the Colosseum, seeking to recreate the sounds of ancient gladiatorial combat within its decaying walls. Working alone in the vast, silent arena under the pale moonlight, Elias began to experience unsettling phenomena. Faint rhythmic thuds, like the distant impact of heavy feet, would echo from the subterranean passages. A chill, unexplainable by the Roman night, would grip him, often accompanied by the distinct metallic scent of old blood. His sophisticated recording equipment would often pick up strange, guttural whispers or sudden distorted roars that weren't present to his ears. Elias, ever the skeptic, attributed these to wind currents, old pipes, or even his own subconscious mind playing tricks. However, as he pushed deeper into the Colosseum's hypogeumthine underground tunnels where gladiators and beasts awaited their fate, the manifestations intensified. The rhythmic thuds became a distinct march, the whispers formed incoherent pleas for mercy, and the metallic scent thickened to an oppressive stench. He saw fleeting, shadowy figures, massive and muscular, moving with a ponderous grace, only to vanish when he focused. Elias, despite his scientific resolve, felt an undeniable sense of dread, an overwhelming sorrow and rage that seemed to emanate from the very stones. Elias stumbled upon a small, forgotten alcove, barely larger than a cell, hidden behind a collapsed archway. The air here was colder, heavier, filled with a palpable despair. He knew, instinctively, that this was a place of immense suffering. He also began to understand the true nature of the ghost of the gladiators. This wasn't a curse from a vengeful individual. It was the collective, unending anguish of thousands of lives lost in the arena. Their final moments of terror, agony, and dehumanization imprinted upon the very stones. The Colosseum itself was a vast, tragic capacitor, perpetually replaying the cycle of violence and death it had witnessed. The curse was an eternal, inescapable torment of lost souls, denied peace by the very nature of their brutal end. Driven by a profound, uncharacteristic empathy, Elias abandoned his acoustic study. His new mission was to bring peace to the suffering. He delved into ancient texts, researching gladiatorial oaths, obscure funerary rites for those denied proper burials, and forgotten prayers to the gods of the underworld for violent deaths. He realized that the gladiators, often slaves or condemned men, were rarely granted the dignified passage to the afterlife that most Romans sought. Their spirits were restless because their final moments were filled with terror and their lives deemed disposable. For weeks, Elias returned to the Colosseum, not to record sound, but to offer solace. He performed humble, respectful rituals in the hypogeum, pouring libations of water, offering simple prayers, speaking aloud the names of known gladiators from historical records, and, crucially, offering words of recognition and peace to the thousands of nameless, forgotten souls. He acknowledged their suffering, their humanity, and the brutality they endured. He did not seek to dispel them by force, but to offer them the dignity denied in life and death. As Elias completed his solemn, solitary task, a profound quiet settled over the Colosseum. The lingering chill lifted. The phantom sounds faded to an almost imperceptible hum of memory. The oppressive weight of despair lightened, replaced by a sense of melancholic peace. The ghost of the gladiators, finally acknowledged and honored, seemed to sigh in collective relief. Their endless torment finally soothed. Elias Thorne emerged from the Colosseum a changed man, no longer a mere historian, but a guardian of memory. He devoted his career to ensuring that the stories of the marginalized and forgotten dead were told, understanding that true historical preservation sometimes required more than just academic rigor, required compassion. The Colosseum stands to this day, an icon of Roman power. But for those sensitive enough to feel its lingering presence, it speaks not only of glory, but also of a profound, enduring sorrow, a testament to the tragic price of human entertainment. Beneath the elegant marble floors and soaring arches of the Roman baths, a secret history lay buried. While the elite of the empire saw a place of leisure and social gathering, a darker truth existed: a brutal and forgotten past where slaves, political prisoners, and rivals met their end in the labyrinthine steam rooms and hidden plunge pools. This hidden violence left a spiritual scar on the very fabric of the baths, creating a terrifying curse known as the blood-stained walls of the Roman baths. It was a curse not of a single vengeful ghost, but of a pervasive, horrifying memory of violence that haunted all who dared to desecrate its tragic past. Our story begins in the modern era with Dr. Alaric Thorne, an arrogant and ambitious architectural historian. Thorne saw the baths not as a site of human tragedy, but as a masterpiece of Roman engineering and design, a testament to the empire's genius. He dismissed local legends of hauntings as mere folklore, scoffing at the notion that the ancient walls held a deeper, more sinister truth. He was obsessed with an unproven theory that the baths contained a hidden system of pressure valves, a marvel of engineering he was determined to uncover for personal glory. During an unauthorized late-night investigation in a sealed-off section of the baths, Thorne discovered a hidden, unmarked chamber. Inside, he found not a system of valves, but a small, crude altar covered in ancient, petrified residue. A sense of unease crept into his mind, a feeling of profound sadness and violence. Dismissing his unease, Thorne mocked the ancient ritual, scoffing at the pain and suffering he felt, and he ordered his team to remove the altar for scientific study. As Thorne's fame grew, so did the chilling horror that plagued him. He found his dreams filled with terrifying visions of brutal, shadowy figures struggling in the dark. He would wake with the phantom scent of old blood in his nostrils, a nauseating smell that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He would feel a cold dread that sapped his strength and left him trembling with a profound, inexplicable fear. His once sharp mind became obsessed with the suffering he had mocked, a psychological torment that slowly unraveled his sanity. The true curse of the blood-stained walls of the Roman baths was a spiritual echo of unacknowledged violence. The baths, as a vast tomb for the forgotten dead, were steeped in the collective, unacknowledged terror of countless lives lost. Thorne, by desecrating the very heart of this suffering, had spiritually traded places with the victims. The curse was an insidious, psychological horror that slowly infected his mind with the same terror and despair that had claimed the lives of the condemned, turning him into a living host for the echoes of their final moments. Driven to despair by his own mental decline and the relentless torment of the unseen horror, Thorne sought the counsel of a reclusive Roman scholar who understood the ancient ways. The scholar explained that Thorne had not simply disturbed an altar, he had desecrated a monument of grief. The only way to appease the suffering was to perform an act of profound humility and remembrance for the innocent victims. Humbled and broken, Thorne returned to the baths alone. In the dead of night, he found the place where the altar had been and knelt in solemn silence. He did not offer prayers to pagan gods, but spoke of recognition and remembrance, honoring the humanity and the brutal end of the forgotten victims. He asked not for forgiveness, but for understanding, acknowledging their suffering and the terror they endured. As he completed his act of restitution, a profound silence fell over the baths. The chilling dread lifted. the phantom sounds faded to a gentle, mournful breeze. The blood-stained walls of the Roman baths, finally acknowledged and honored, found its peace. Thorne lived the rest of his life not as a celebrated historian, but as a quiet advocate for preserving the memory of the forgotten, understanding that true historical preservation required more than just ambition. It required a profound respect for the humanity of the past. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Beneath the grand and storied Appian Way, the very artery of the Roman Empire, lay a sprawling, silent city of the dead. The crypts and catacombs. These vast underground labyrinths were not just burial sites, but sacred resting places for generations of Romans. Their final peace fiercely protected by tradition and reverence. To disturb this solemn repose was to invite a chilling curse born from the very finality of death itself. The Roman crypts of the Appian Way. This was a curse not of a single, vengeful spirit, but of a pervasive spiritual cold, a silent torment of isolation and cosmic dread. Our story begins in the late 4th century AD, a time when Christianity was on the rise and many of the old traditions were waning. Cassius Valerius, a prominent but disillusioned Roman scholar, believed the old ways to be primitive superstition. He was obsessed with acquiring a complete collection of funeral artifacts for his private gallery, a pursuit that led him to the darkest, most secluded crypts of the Appian Way. He saw the tombs not as sacred ground, but as historical treasures ripe for the taking. He ordered his men to plunder the crypts, taking statues, inscriptions, and personal effects, laughing at the ancient warnings carved in stone. As Cassius's collection grew, a subtle, insidious change began to plague him. His once bustling villa became a place of profound solitude. His friends and family, once a constant presence, grew distant and unresponsive, their faces seeming to blur and their voices to fade. He found himself utterly alone, surrounded by his treasures, but unable to connect with anyone. The vibrant sounds of the city's life seemed to dim, replaced by a deafening silence. The true curse of the Roman crypts of the Appian Way was a spiritual echo of ultimate isolation. The crypts, as a sacred resting place for the dead, were steeped in the spiritual essence of finality. Cassius, by desecrating them, had ruptured the delicate balance, and in doing so, inflicted upon himself the very state of the dead, an existence of profound separation from the world of the living. The curse was a relentless psychological torment that slowly unraveled his connections to humanity, ensuring that he, though still alive, would become an isolated ghost in his own life. Driven to despair by his unbearable loneliness and the deafening silence that followed him everywhere, Cassius sought the counsel of a reclusive, elderly priest who still clung to the old beliefs. The priest, seeing the hollowness in Cassius's eyes, explained that the finality of death was not meant to be violated. Cassius, by stealing from the dead, had spiritually traded places with them. Only an act of profound, selfless reunion could lift the curse. Humbled and broken, Cassius made a desperate decision. He painstakingly returned every artifact he had stolen, carrying them back into the dark crypts. He didn't just place them where they were found. He performed personal, respectful rituals, speaking prayers of apology and remembrance. He invited a small group of friends and family, and, in a profound act of penance, held a shared meal and read aloud the names of the dead he had wronged, reconnecting himself with the bonds of humanity in the very heart of the place he had desecrated. Slowly, the isolating silence lifted. The faces of his loved ones became clear again, their voices vibrant. The pervasive spiritual cold receded, replaced by the profound warmth of connection. The Roman crypts of the Appian Way, their sanctity restored, finally released their grip. Cassius lived the rest of his life not as a collector, but as a quiet advocate for preserving historical integrity. A changed man who understood that some curses are not brought by active malice, but by violating the natural order of life and death, ensuring that the very isolation of the grave will be brought to the living. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. the horror of the Roman arena in the sun-baked dust of the Roman arenas. Where cheering crowds roared and blood stained the sand, a terrible spectacle played out. The damnatio ad bestias, the condemnation to the beasts. This was a form of public execution, where condemned criminals, often Christians, were thrown to wild, hungry animals. The horror of this practice, however, left a chilling spiritual scar on the very ground where it took place, creating a terrifying curse known as the horror of the Roman arena. This was not a haunting of a single tormented ghost, but a pervasive, lingering curse born from the immense concentrated despair and suffering of countless innocent deaths. Our story begins in the aftermath of a particularly gruesome series of executions in the Flavian amphitheater, a smaller arena often used for more private, brutal displays. Titus Valerius, the aging lanista, gladiator trainer of a renowned ludus, was a man hardened by years of living on the periphery of death. He saw the world through a lens of brutal pragmatism, believing that fear and discipline were the only true currencies. Yet, even his hardened heart was troubled by the damnatio, seeing it not as a sport, but as an act of senseless barbarism. As the executions continued, Titus began to notice strange changes in his gladiators. His most fearsome champion, a man who had faced death 100 times without flinching, grew increasingly withdrawn, plagued by nightmares. Another, a bold and confident warrior, became skittish, his eyes darting to the shadows, muttering of unseen presences. The gladiators, men who lived and breathed violence, were terrified. They spoke of hearing the ghostly snarls of phantom lions and the desperate, whimpering cries of spectral victims in the arena's shadows. Titus, ever the pragmatist, scoffed at their fears, attributing them to stress and battle fatigue. But then, he started to experience the horror himself. Standing in the deserted arena at dusk, he would feel an oppressive chill, a cold dread that sapped his strength. He would hear the rustling of sand where there was no wind, and catch glimpses of fleeting, shadowy figures moving with a frantic, desperate energy. The air itself seemed to hum with a palpable, silent anguish. He realized with a growing, chilling certainty that the arena was not merely a place of death, but an eternal echo of the terror that had soaked into its soil. The true curse of the horror of the Roman arena was the echo of innocent despair. The damnatio, with its one-sided, terror-fueled deaths, had created an overwhelming spiritual imbalance. The collective fear of the innocent, defenseless victims had clung to the very air, forever binding their terror to the sight. It was an insatiable psychic stain, a curse that fed on the psychological torment of anyone who entered the arena, infecting their minds with the same terror and despair that had claimed the lives of the condemned. The gladiators, who had no choice but to absorb this spiritual decay, were the first to fall victim. Driven by a strange mix of self-preservation and a burgeoning sense of empathy, Titus sought answers. He consulted with a handful of hidden Christian elders who spoke not of curses, but of souls in torment, denied peace and a proper passage to the afterlife. They explained that only an act of profound compassion, a ceremony of remembrance for the innocent, could bring solace to the haunted ground. Titus, risking his reputation and position, began a new ritual. In the dead of night, he and his most trusted men would sneak into the arena. They would not offer sacrifices to pagan gods, but would light candles, pour out libations of water, and, most importantly, speak aloud the names of the Christian martyrs they had heard whispered in the market squares, acknowledging their humanity and the brutality of their deaths. They would pray for their peaceful rest, bringing a quiet solemnity to a place that had only ever known chaos and violence. Slowly, the oppressive weight began to lift. The phantom snarls faded. The whispers of despair softened to a gentle, mournful breeze. The arena, though still a place of historical tragedy, began to feel less like a place of dread and more like a somber, sacred ground. The horror of the Roman arena, finally acknowledged and honored, found its peace. Titus, a changed man, retired from his life as a lanista. dedicating his remaining years to helping the persecuted and honoring the dignity of all life. Understanding that some scars are etched, not in stone, but in the soul of a place. The story of the Flavian amphitheater's haunting remains a silent testament to the enduring power of suffering, and a chilling reminder that some curses are not inflicted by malevolent spirits, but are born from the profound, unacknowledged pain of a brutal past. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. The dark prophecies of the Sibyl in the hallowed caves and sacred groves of the ancient world, where the veil between mortals and gods was thin, lived the Sibyls, enigmatic priestesses, gifted or cursed, with the ability to foresee the future, their pronouncements often cryptic, always potent. Yet, among their many foretellings, some were so dire, so imbued with dread, that they became known as the dark prophecies of the Sibyl. This was a curse woven not just of words, but of an inescapable fate that shadowed all who heard them, turning hope to despair and light to ashes. Our story begins in the waning days of the Roman Republic, with Cassandra Leah, a brilliant but intensely curious senator, desperate to secure his family's legacy amidst the political turmoil. Cassandra had always scoffed at omens and prophecies, a man of logic and pragmatic ambition. But as civil war loomed and his rivals gained power, he grew increasingly desperate. He sought out the most ancient and revered of the Sibyls, the Cumaean Sibyl, whose prophecies were said to be unerring. Carved into oak leaves or whispered on the wind, Cassandra journeyed to Cumae, to the Sibyl's cavern. The air within was thick with the scent of sulfur and ancient dust, resonating with a strange, otherworldly hum. The Sibyl, a withered figure with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of millennia, greeted him. Cassandra posed his question: what future awaits Rome and my family amidst this chaos? The Sibyl's response was not a direct answer, but a terrifying cascade of images and fragmented visions that flooded Cassandra's mind. He saw Rome burning, its grand monuments crumbling. He saw his own lineage ending in ruin, his descendants scattering, cursed by madness and betrayal. He saw a victory, yes, but one that would be bought with rivers of blood, leading to an empire built on tyranny, ultimately destined for a cataclysmic fall. It was not a single clear doom, but an overwhelming tapestry of inevitable suffering, personal and public. Cassandra reeled from the vision. The dark prophecies of the Sibyl were not just predictions. They were a curse woven into the fabric of reality itself, feeding on the very despair they instilled. The more he tried to defy the visions, the more clearly he saw their threads intertwining with his actions. Every strategic decision he made to avert the prophecy seemed with chilling irony to hasten its coming. His attempts to secure his family's power led directly to their ruin. His efforts to save Rome from civil war only contributed to the rise of the ruthless empire she had shown. The curse was an inescapable, self-fulfilling cycle of predestined despair, amplified by his own futile efforts to change it. Haunted by the inescapable visions, Cassandra's once sharp mind began to fray. He became paranoid, seeing the Sibyl's dark prophecies in every shadow, every political maneuver. His ambition turned into a frantic, desperate struggle against an unseen, unbeatable enemy, fate itself. His colleagues noted his increasingly erratic behavior, his desperate attempts to control events that spun wildly out of his grasp. He died not by an enemy's blade, but from a broken spirit, consumed by the crushing weight of the inevitable future the Sibyl had shown him. The dark prophecies of the Sibyl endured, whispered among the few who knew Cassandra's true fate. The Sibyls themselves were often seen as tragic figures. Burdened by knowledge too terrible to bear, their warnings rarely heeded until it was too late. The curse of their prophecies lay not in their malevolence, but in their absolute certainty and the despair they inflicted, proving that some destinies, however dark, are immutable. The ruins of the Sibyl's cave still stand, a silent testament to the ancient power of fate and the chilling truth that some futures, once glimpsed, cannot be undone. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. and the golden dust of the ancient world. Where empires clashed and legends were forged, the might of the Persian army was a force unmatched. They marched across continents, a diverse host of soldiers from every corner of the vast Achaemenid Empire. Yet, for many, their ultimate fate was to fall on distant, foreign soil. Their bones scattered and their names forgotten, far from the sun of their homeland. This tragic, unacknowledged end left a spiritual scar on the lands they fell, creating a chilling curse. The phantom soldiers of the Persian army. This was a haunting born, not of anger, but of profound, unceasing grief and homesickness. Our story begins in modern-day Greece with Dr. Eleni Valenti, a brilliant but overly ambitious archaeologist. Eleni was obsessed with proving a controversial theory about the Battle of Marathon, a battle where a vast number of Persian soldiers were slain. She believed the Persian casualties were not as high as history recorded, and she saw the battlefield not as a site of tragedy, but as a stage for her personal academic glory. She dismissed the local reverence for the sacred soil and the quiet warnings of elders, scoffing at the notion that the land itself held a memory. During her unauthorized, aggressive excavation of a newly discovered mass grave, Eleni mocked the ancient, unadorned Persian burial rites, seeing them as primitive and insignificant. She ordered her team to quickly remove the skeletal remains, showing a profound disrespect for the fallen soldiers who died so far from home. As Eleni's fame grew, so did the chilling horror that plagued her. She found her sleep tormented by vivid nightmares of men in dusty, ancient armor, their faces filled with a deep, silent sorrow. The air around her would grow inexplicably cold, and she would hear faint, mournful whispers in a language she did not understand, a chorus of homesickness and grief. Her once sharp mind became obsessed with the suffering she had mocked, a psychological torment that slowly unraveled her sanity. The true curse of the phantom soldiers of the Persian army was a spiritual echo of unacknowledged grief. The Persian soldiers who died far from home and were forgotten by their empire were trapped in a state of perpetual sorrow. Eleni, by desecrating their final resting place and mocking their memory, had spiritually connected herself to their unending torment. The curse was a psychological horror that slowly infected her mind with the same grief and homesickness that had claimed the lives of the fallen, turning her into a living host for the echoes of their final moments. Driven to despair by her own mental decline and the relentless torment of the unseen horror, Eleni sought the counsel of a reclusive Greek scholar who understood the ancient ways. The scholar explained that Eleni had not simply disturbed a burial site, she had desecrated a sacred monument of grief. The only way to appease the suffering was to perform an act of profound humility and remembrance for the soldiers who died so far from home. Humbled and broken, Eleni returned to the battlefield alone. In the dead of night, she found the mass grave and knelt in solemn silence. She did not offer prayers to pagan gods, but spoke of recognition and remembrance, honoring the humanity and the tragic end of the forgotten soldiers. She recited their names from a preserved ancient scroll, acknowledging their sacrifice and the profound grief of their final moments. As she completed her act of restitution, a profound silence fell over the battlefield. The chilling dread lifted. The mournful whispers faded to a gentle breeze. The phantom soldiers of the Persian army, finally acknowledged and honored, found their peace. Eleni lived the rest of her life not as a celebrated archaeologist, but as a quiet advocate for preserving the memory of all fallen soldiers, regardless of their nationality. Understanding that true historical preservation required a profound respect for the humanity of the past. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. The ancient haunting of Hadrian's Wall stretching across the rugged northern lands of Britannia. Hadrian's Wall stands as a monumental testament to Roman ambition, the colossal barrier built to mark the very edge of the known world and keep out the untamed barbarians to the north. For centuries, whispers have echoed along its desolate stretches, tales of unseen presences and chilling encounters. This is the tale of the ancient haunting of Hadrian's Wall, a curse born not of a singular tragedy, but from the cumulative weight of endless solitude, brutal sacrifice, and a land that never truly surrendered. Our story begins in the 2nd century CE, during the height of Roman occupation, with Centurion Valerius, a seasoned Roman officer. Valerius was a pragmatic man, devoted to the legion and the empire's might. He commanded a small detachment stationed at one of the wall's remote mile castles, a desolate, wind-swept outpost perpetually shrouded in mist. His days were spent enforcing the empire's will, ensuring no Caledonia warrior slipped past, and maintaining the arduous solitude of his men. Life on the wall was brutal. Relentless patrols, the biting cold, the constant vigilance against unseen enemies, and the crushing isolation slowly wore down the men. Valerius noticed the change first in his soldiers. Muttered fears of shadows moving in the fog, the sounds of distant, mournful cries on the wind that were not animal or human, and the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. They attributed it to homesickness, the harsh conditions, or the superstitious fears of the conquered Britons. But Valerius himself began to experience the phenomena. He would see fleeting, shadowy figures marching along the wall's parapet, just out of focus. He'd hear faint Latin commands whispered in the dead of night, followed by the clinking of spectral armor. His carefully guarded watchfires would flicker and dim for no reason. These weren't singular, dramatic hauntings. They were pervasive, subtle, yet relentlessly unsettling. The wall felt alive, but with a cold, desperate sentience. Valerius, seeking answers, consulted the local Britons, old men who remembered a time before Rome. They spoke not of individual ghosts, but of the very land mourning, of a spirit of the frontier that resented the foreign barrier. They told him that the wall itself was soaking up the sorrow of the endlessly marching, the silent despair of homesick soldiers, the bitterness of the conquered natives, and the quiet fury of the untamed north. The true curse of the ancient haunting of Hadrian's Wall was not a specific, vengeful spirit, but the accumulated despair of a frontier. A psychic scar left by centuries of occupation, constant vigilance, bloodshed, and the inherent loneliness of being on the edge of civilization. The wall was a monument to division, and it resonated with the endless lament of all that was lost and separated, driven by a strange mix of duty and dread. Valerius realized the haunting wasn't a threat to be fought, but a sorrow to be understood. He couldn't dismantle the wall, nor could he undo the history it embodied. He began a new kind of duty, tending to the wall not just as a defensive structure, but as a living, suffering entity. He ordered his men to perform small, daily acts of respect, leaving offerings of water and bread for the unseen, planting wildflowers in the crevices, and, crucially, speaking aloud the names of fallen comrades, both Roman and Briton, known or unknown. He encouraged them to share stories, to laugh, to find humanity in the desolate landscape, to defy the creeping despair. Slowly, subtly, a change began. The cold dread lessened. The phantom whispers softened, becoming less mournful and more like the gentle sigh of the wind. The fleeting shadows seemed less tormented. The ancient haunting of Hadrian's Wall, acknowledged and perhaps even soothed, found a measure of quiet peace. The burden, though still present, became a melancholic hum rather than an oppressive weight. Valerius completed his service on the wall, a changed man. He no longer saw it merely as a military structure, but as a testament to enduring human experience. After his return to Rome, he spoke of its silent grief, a testament to the fact that even stone can hold centuries of sorrow. Hadrian's Wall stands to this day an awe-inspiring ruin. But for those who walk its windswept path, a quiet understanding can settle upon them, that some places are cursed, not by a dramatic tragedy, but by the relentless accumulation of human suffering, eternally echoing the lament of a divided land. Beneath the bustling streets of Rome, a silent, sprawling city of the dead lies in wait. the ancient catacombs. For centuries, whispered tales have warned of restless spirits and unseen forces within their labyrinthine passages. But few know the true horror of the haunted catacombs of Rome, a curse born not of malevolence, but of forgotten grief. Our story follows Dr. Elena Rossi, a brilliant but skeptical historian dedicated to uncovering the forgotten narratives of ancient Rome. Elena believed only in what she could touch, measure, and verify. Legends of hauntings were mere folklore to her. Her current obsession was an unexplored section of the catacomb of Priscilla, recently unearthed. Rumored to contain the tombs of early Christian martyrs whose identities had been lost to time. Elena saw it as her life's purpose to restore their names and dignity. After securing special permission, Elena descended into the newly opened section. The air was heavy, damp, and still, carrying the scent of millennia of undisturbed earth. As she meticulously documented the ancient loculi, she began to experience unsettling phenomena. Whispers, faint and mournful, seemed to emanate from the very walls just beyond the edge of hearing. Shadows danced in her lantern's light, seeming to coalesce into fleeting shapes. Her carefully organized notes would mysteriously rearrange themselves, and her recording equipment would flicker and die without explanation. Elena, despite a growing unease, attributed everything to fatigue, the oppressive atmosphere, or her overactive imagination. She pushed deeper, driven by her scholarly mission. Then she found it. A hidden chamber unlike any other. Inside, surrounded by countless nameless burial niches, stood a single ornate sarcophagus, its lid intricately carved but bearing no inscription. As Elena approached, a sudden piercing chill filled the chamber. The whispers intensified, no longer faint, but a chorus of heart-wrenching sighs, choked sobs, and a profound collective sense of abandonment. Over the next few days, as Elena worked tirelessly in the chamber, the haunting escalated. The apparitions became clear, not menacing specters, but translucent figures of men, women, and children, their faces etched with sorrow, their movements slow and aimless. They would pass through her, their cold touch leaving an icy ache. The whispers formed coherent pleas, not for vengeance, but for remembrance. Elena soon realized the terrible truth. These were the forgotten martyrs. Their spirits bound to the catacombs, trapped by the collective anonymity of their resting places. Their curse was not to harm, but to eternally seek the recognition they were denied in death. They yearned for their names to be spoken, their stories told, their sacrifice acknowledged. Elena's skepticism shattered. The haunting was an outpouring of profound ancient grief. The catacombs were haunted by the curse of the forgotten names, driven by a new sense of purpose. Elena abandoned her standard historical methodology. Instead, she meticulously began to piece together fragmented clues, small symbols carved near niches, faded etchings, the context of artifacts found nearby. She worked tirelessly, connecting fragments, until she began to reconstruct their identities, their families, and the brief glimpses of their lives. As Elena spoke, the first reconstructed name aloud, a tremor passed through the catacombs. The spectral figures seemed to pause, their forms wavering. As she painstakingly identified more and more of the forgotten, sketching their faces, documenting their small personal effects, and telling their stories, the whispers softened. The figures grew less mournful, their movements less despairing. A faint, peaceful glow began to emanate from their forms. When Elena finally completed her monumental work, identifying nearly every individual in the chamber, the overwhelming sense of sorrow lifted entirely. The spirits, their names restored, their grief acknowledged, seemed to dissipate, not in fear, but in peace. Elena emerged from the catacombs a changed woman, no longer a skeptic, but a historian with a profound understanding of the human spirit. She published her findings not as a sensational tale of ghosts, but as a meticulously researched academic work that brought to light the identities of hundreds of forgotten martyrs. Her work was met with awe and respect, not just from the academic community, but from the faithful who found solace in the newly rediscovered histories. The Catacomb of Priscilla, once rumored to be haunted, now became a place of solemn remembrance and quiet peace. And though the whispers were gone, Alina forever carried the quiet understanding that some places are not cursed by evil, but by the profound and aching need to be remembered. Beneath the grand and storied Appian Way, the very artery of the Roman Empire, lay a sprawling, silent city of the dead, the crypts and catacombs. These vast underground labyrinths were not just burial sites, but sacred resting places for generations of Romans, their final peace fiercely protected by tradition and reverence. To disturb this solemn repose was to invite a chilling curse born from the very finality of death itself, the Roman crypts of the Appian Way. This was a curse not of a single, vengeful spirit, but of a pervasive spiritual cold, a silent torment of isolation and cosmic dread. Our story begins in the late 4th century AD, a time when Christianity was on the rise and many of the old traditions were waning. Cassius Valerius, a prominent but disillusioned Roman scholar, believed the old ways to be primitive superstition. He was obsessed with acquiring a complete collection of funeral artifacts for his private gallery, a pursuit that led him to the darkest, most secluded crypts of the Appian Way. He saw the tombs not as sacred ground, but as historical treasures ripe for the taking. He ordered his men to plunder the crypts, taking statues, inscriptions, and personal effects, laughing at the ancient warnings carved in stone. As Cassius's collection grew, a subtle, insidious change began to plague him. His once bustling villa became a place of profound solitude. His friends and family, once a constant presence, grew distant and unresponsive, their faces seeming to blur and their voices to fade. He found himself utterly alone, surrounded by his treasures, but unable to connect with anyone. The vibrant sounds of the city's life seemed to dim, replaced by a deafening silence. The true curse of the Roman crypts of the Appian Way was a spiritual echo of ultimate isolation. The crypts, as a sacred resting place for the dead, were steeped in the spiritual essence of finality. Cassius, by desecrating them, had ruptured the delicate balance, and in doing so, inflicted upon himself the very state of the dead, an existence of profound separation from the world of the living. The curse was a relentless psychological torment that slowly unraveled his connections to humanity, ensuring that he, though still alive, would become an isolated ghost in his own life. Driven to despair by his unbearable loneliness and the deafening silence that followed him everywhere, Cassius sought the counsel of a reclusive, elderly priest who still clung to the old beliefs. The priest, seeing the hollowness in Cassius's eyes, explained that the finality of death was not meant to be violated. Cassius, by stealing from the dead, had spiritually traded places with them. Only an act of profound, selfless reunion could lift the curse. Humbled and broken, Cassius made a desperate decision. He painstakingly returned every artifact he had stolen, carrying them back into the dark crypts. He didn't just place them where they were found. He performed personal, respectful rituals, speaking prayers of apology and remembrance. He invited a small group of friends and family, and, in a profound act of penance, held a shared meal and read aloud the names of the dead he had wronged, reconnecting himself with the bonds of humanity in the very heart of the place he had desecrated. Slowly, the isolating silence lifted. The faces of his loved ones became clear again, their voices vibrant. The pervasive spiritual cold receded, replaced by the profound warmth of connection. The Roman crypts of the Appian Way, their sanctity restored, finally released their grip. Cassius lived the rest of his life not as a collector, but as a quiet advocate for preserving historical integrity. A changed man who understood that some curses are not brought by active malice, but by violating the natural order of life and death, ensuring that the very isolation of the grave will be brought to the living. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.